So before I start, I'd like to thank very much the university for having us. Thank you for all of you who are here, and we're very glad to be here. Now, on to the debate. The debate today says the United States of America should intervene militarily to stop cases of genocide around the world. According to the 1948 UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, genocide is defined as acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. In the past 150 years, tens of millions of men, women, and children have lost their lives in genocide. Millions more have been tortured, raped, or forced from their homes. Just in the 20th and 21st century, we have had genocide in Armenia, Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur, the Holocaust, and in our time, Myanmar. Because genocide is still an issue that affects millions of people around the world, we believe that U.S. should intervene militarily to stop cases of genocide. First, we will defend the importance of military intervention, and secondly, we will defend why we think the U.S. is the actor that needs to act. According to Gregory Staunton, a genocide scholar and president of Genocide Watch, a nonprofit that aims to making a genocide history, genocide is a process that develops in 10 stages that are predictable but not inexorable. At each stage, preventive measures can stop it. The process is not linear. Stages may occur simultaneously. Logically, later stages must be preceded by early stages. But all stages continue to operate throughout the process. Those stages are classification, symbolization, discrimination, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, persecution, extermination, and denial. At each stage, preventive measures can stop it. However, when we have reached stage 9, which is extermination, which is when the killing have started, only a military intervention can function. At this stage, people are dying, and we have no time for negotiation or debates. Extermination begins and quickly becomes the mass killing legally called genocide. It is extermination to the killers because they do not believe their victims to be fully human. When it is sponsored by the state, the armed forces often work with militias to do the killing. Already dead bodies are dismembered. Rape is used as a tool of war to genetically alter and eradicate the other group. Destruction of culture and religious property is employed to annihilate the group's existence from history. All men of fighting ages are murdered. All the members of targeted group are exterminated. At this stage, only rapid and overwhelming armed intervention can stop the genocide. Real safe areas or refugee escape corridors should be established with heavily armed international protection. UN Security Council is paralyzed. Regional alliances must act anyway under Chapter 8 of the UN Charter, or the UN General Assembly should authorize action under the Uniting for Peace Resolution, GARs, which has been used 13 times for such armed intervention. If strong nations will not provide troops to intervene directly, they should provide the airlift, equipment, and financial means necessarily for regional states to intervene. The plan of the affirmative side is that the U.S. military should create a unit whose sole mission is the prevention of genocide. This unit will be comprised of 20,000 soldiers, experts, and politicians who will work on all fronts to ensure that the genocide ends. Their mission will be threefolded: to create safety zones for those escaping massacres, to provide humanitarian and medical aid to victims of the massacres, to defeat the militia that is killing people. Ladies and gentlemen, it is important to understand that the affirmative does not think that war is the best solution. Absolutely not. That war create more casualties and destruction, but in a case of a genocide where a group of people is intentionally being killed by the government, a military intervention is the only solution. We will also defend that the USA is the only country that is equipped to do that. How? First, the US is the only country in the world that has a military presence all over the world. According to the Pentagon, the US has 800 military bases in more than 70 countries and territories, and to give you a perspective, Britain, France, and Russia, by contrast, have about 30 bases, and that's all of them combined. Secondly, where the U.S. goes, the world follows. We believe that a U.S. intervention would provoke other countries to intervene because of not only America's hard power, but also its soft power. Elie Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor, said that what destroys the victim is not the attacks of the enemy, but rather the silence of their friends. The only way for us to ensure that we do not condone genocide is to force the US military to intervene to stop causes of genocide around the world. So in the end, if a country like the US has the power to save lives, to stop one of the worst mankind crime to happen, then we believe that this should be done. Because if it is saving lives, it is much more important than any other reason to why it shouldn't be intervening. Thank you.
All right, so to remind format, 3-minute question period. So I am first keyed on to what I see as a distinction in your affirmative between responding to ongoing violence through military force and preventing the earlier stages. What role do you see for you as a military forces in preventing genocide as opposed to using their global presence to stop it when it's happening?
Could you explain more what you're trying to mean?
Sure. So you identified that the very first stage of genocide was classification.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that there's a military role in preventing classification?
No, I say that the only time that it is necessary for military intervention is on the 9th stage, extermination, where the genocide has started.
Okay. Who decides whether or not to deploy the U.S. forces to respond to ongoing 9th stage genocide?
That is according to the UN mandate, which says that if it is seen that in a country, if the government is inflicting the killing and stuff, then that's when it should be done. Something should be done.
Right, but who makes the determination that a genocide is underway, and who makes the order that U.S. forces would then engage in military action? These things have to be explicitly ordered in order to take place.
The international community, which includes also the U.S. itself.
So your argument is that the international community would order U.S. forces to engage?
It should not order. If the U.S. and international community sees that there is the genocide, that's when the U.S. intervenes. It doesn't order, it just sees that.
The time issue seems confusing to me, because if we don't order military intervention until 9th stage extermination is happening, how is it possible to get an entire world to respond to that fast enough to actually do what you're saying? Because your argument was that the U.S. was key because we have global presence everywhere already. But if we have to deploy specifically after hearing that genocide has already begun, it doesn't seem like that would ever work.
At the end of the day, we're saying that military intervention should come if there is the genocide. So if it is said that there is the genocide, and in that case it is seen at the 9th stage, then that's when it should happen.
Let's be a little more specific about what you mean by intervention. Because the third point you isolated was destroying militia groups engaged in acts of killing. How do you intend to do that?
Elimination if they do not stop from threats.
Okay, so you're discussing targeted killing of people suspected
if it is
of being
needed.
Involved in militias organized
If it is needed.
how do we know if it's needed?
If the people are not stopping the killing.
But once again, if we have a matter of days, who makes the factual determination that killing is or is not happening?
Well, I would add to that. I mean, first of all, it's not that genocide happens overnight. And then there's also a lot of organizations such as Genocide Watch that basically give us a lot of data on what's happening around the world. And the reason why we say that the U.S. would be the best to intervene is because the U.S. actually has bases all over the world. So it means that once the U.S. has made a decision to deploy, then that should be quicker and faster.
So the U.S. is the one making the decision.
Well, there's two
Right.
things. No, there's two things. I think you're confusing two things. The first, the U.S. is not the one to decide whether genocide is happening. That's not the U.S. It is the UN through its Office of Genocide Prevention, and then there's also a lot of NGOs that are working around the world that actually talk about or who claim when genocide is happening. Now, once that is done, the U.S. is legally bound to make a decision or to intervene. And then now in the U.S., whether the military of the U.S. intervenes, that is a decision of the, I don't know, your country, I think is the Congress and the government to decide whether they will deploy the forces.
Right, I have one more question. Intervention, then what? We've eliminated militia groups engaged in killing. What next?
I think we'll not defend any specific action. I think that part of what we're saying is people are dying. What happens afterwards, as long as we stop the killings, everything else is not as important as the people dying.
Okay, I'm going to start with the poem and then go on to our actual factuals. Alrighty. My hands go up and your gun goes, well, what's next? Saying that you came to serve and protect, but in all actuality, it's a cycle. You kill one, it's okay. You kill two, you get leave with pay. The silent cries of a community just doesn't faze you. He was just doing his job. Well, if killing black people is the job, it's a job well done. Now they've killed someone else's son or daughter, slaughtered in cold blood on the daily. They are paid to kill. They say, cool, pay me. But when televised, they are remorseful. Just a bad traffic stop, a false alarm, giving murderers right to bear arms. When I show my bare arms, it's as a sign of surrenderance, it's a weapon. John Bell, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, John Crawford, Sandra Bland, I cannot seem to scream these names loud enough. Jamel Robertson was stopping a fight, yet his death is the only thing you remember about him. Oh no, but here I go again, using my black privilege to quote a dead black body to make a point. And the sad reality is, the point will never be made. This genocide will continue day by day. And the people who are supposed to stop it are causing it. So now, my hands will go up and your gun will go boom on another Rwandan, on another black person, on another life. While the affirmative plans sound good, we stand adamantly resolved that the United States federal government should not create a unit for preventing genocide. Our argument are threefold. First, the way that police act domestically is only a glimpse of how they act internationally. Bringing in a bunch of tanks and guns and firing weapons with forces who don't know the enemy or the geographic terrain very well without knowledge of the local language cannot reduce violence and bring about peace. Who determined what's a genocide? The process is fundamentally ambiguous and decided by the people who have no interest in actually saving lives. They have faith that the United States will accurately determine what is a genocide. The faith is misplaced. In the present day, police brutality has harmed many communities, as the poem stated many names, and also the historic record demonstrates: Vietnam, Korea, Kosovo, Grenada, Iraq, Afghanistan. The list goes on. Everywhere the United States exercises its coercive military power, civilian casualties stack up, and we call it a collateral damage. But these lives are real and they matter. Second, there are no checks for the biggest military in the world. What the affirmative plan is discussing is an army for which there is no feasible counterbalance. If this genocide unit is created, it will be able to function without any accountability, especially because the countries where it would be fighting are in the midst of major crisis and would never be able to resist. Their approach to having more United States troops on the ground creates the conditions for genocide. The start of the genocide in Rwanda was due to the outside forces coming in and essentially choosing sides. For example, the Hutus armed to kill Tutsis. This has always been the U.S.'s interventions work, and the likelihood of the United States involvement will not advance the democracy, as they say, but will only escalate the tension in those areas. As Alan Cooperman, a professor of an international relations class at Johns Hopkins University, writes, massive ethnic violence is most often the consequence of escalating civil wars. Current Western policies often does just the opposite. The unilateral consequences of current policy may be to escalate civil wars and thereby increase the frequency and the intensifying of the genocide and ethnic cleansing. Third, the United States does not have the moral or language authority to engage in military interventions. The debate here is not a decision between action and inaction. There are options available besides direct military intervention by the United States. Rather, we must question the effectiveness and the moral hazards created by trying to implement precision policy with what can only function as blunt instruments. I can see the rest of my time.
Give us an example of places
stop genocide?
Wait,
And it led to bad consequences. Can you give us an example of where the United States intervened to stop genocide around the world?
I can't give you that.
Yeah, we can. There have been a lot of these examples. We would point to two in particular.
Just
the
the
first one would be Kosovo.
Mhm.
This was the kind of international intervention that your argument would seem to indicate is good, but on the ground, reality is we carpet bomb areas and don't care about the collateral damage. And we've made a larger argument about how we use the specter of global democratic values as a false flag to advance U.S. strategic values. The Iraq War is a great example of how
Yeah, but that was
that.
not a genocide though. It's like, can you give us specific, because you're making a lot of arguments about why U.S. interventions are bad, and we'll not contest that, but can you give us specific examples of when it intervened because of a genocide and it didn't stop? Because at the end of the day, the genocide in Kosovo was ended, right? It ended. It was stopped. Was it stopped? Was the killing stopped?
Like, one form of killing was ended, that's right.
Okay. So
Right.
can you give us examples where the negative impacts that you're talking about were specific to genocide as a crime?
Well, yeah, our argument is that the decision over what does and does not constitute a genocide is not a neutral evaluation, but is being made by political actors who have explicit agendas in promoting their own strategic interests. Like, you cite the United Nations, but the United Nations is controlled by the Security Council, which is 5 nations, and I guarantee you that none of the places where these genocides are happening are on that council.
Okay. So is your argument that the U.S. So what is the link between the police brutality here and the genocide around the world? What was the link? What do you think the connection would be?
police brutality is a form of genocide because it's something that they call genocidal acts, and I feel that that's a link because like I said before, genocidal acts still continue, and the U.S.'s intervention has done nothing to stop it. Like Jamel Roberson was stopping a fight in a bar, and the police intervened, and they killed someone without even knowing what fully happened. And even though people were trying to explain what fully happened before this man lost his life, they still did not care, nor did they listen. So the intervention really didn't do anything but cause more harm and damage.
Okay, can you give us, you said that our approach will cause more genocide. Can you give a specific example of how that would happen? What is it about the approach that will create more genocide?
Well, because if you think about it, the U.S. intervention here doesn't even work. So if they're going out internationally, how do you think it's going to work? Like, the intervention here is causing death in communities. So how do you think it's going to correlate to international communities?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to say that we are very, very excited to be here, and that we're really excited to have this debate. So on to tonight's debate. So a few things. What I'm going to do to make the work of the negative quite hard is I'm going to concede to a few of their arguments. The first argument that they make is an argument, the third argument, I'll start with the last one, is an argument basically that the US is not a moral actor. And we'll like to say, yes, we did not claim in any of our arguments that the US is a moral actor, right? We did not claim that the US, this is the moral thing to do because all of these great arguments that could have made. We made none of those. So we agree with that. All the things that they cite about brutality here and all the problems that they said, we agree. We can't deny it. These are realities. Yes, the US has problems here in the country. But then the problem is, the next argument that we'd like to make is that even if we agree that the US has a lot of moral faults, even if we agree that the US has a lot of moral issues here at home, we'd like to actually make the argument that nonetheless, given the circumstances of a genocide, that the US should still intervene. Because let me tell you, the thing is, all of us, whatever moral standard that they put, no one would ever fit the perfect moral standard. They made the arguments basically that every nation has interest. We agree to that. That is very true. And we agree also to the fact that, yes, sometimes countries intervene because of the different interests that they have. For example, that's why they didn't intervene in Rwanda, because in Rwanda there was no strategic interest. But even with all these arguments that we agree with, we still think that the affirmative side presents the best case, and we still believe that our side is presenting to you a more realistic state. First of all, we'd like to make a few arguments. A lot of the arguments that they make are arguments that are generic arguments about U.S. intervention in any other crime. It could be civil war, it could be any other things. But they were not able to give you any specific instances of genocide where the U.S. intervened and it led to all the harms that they talk about. Yes, they talk about Iraq, but the U.S. did not intervene in Iraq because of a genocide that was happening. That was not the reason why it intervened. The U.S. did not intervene. That's the only example, by the way, that they gave you. But when we talk about genocide, genocide is not a civil war, because a civil war is basically two sides that are all with equal powers that are fighting against one another. That's what brings the confusion, right? But genocide is a specific crime where the government is killing its own people. So, within specific instances of genocide, the only harm that America has done is the harm of non-intervention. If they don't believe you, study history. The reason to why in Rwanda, for example, the US did not intervene, even though they had 300 troops that were about 100 kilometers from Rwanda. In different places, in Darfur, the US did not intervene. So all the harms that they're talking about are all due to the fact that the US did not intervene, not due to the fact that the US intervened. So now we have a glimpse, we have a chance here on our side that if the US intervenes, that there are ways in which the US could actually make a difference. Because at the end of the day, whether the US is messed up, whether the US has done all these harms, as long as you're saving lives, that does not matter. Because let me ask you, if you're dying, would you care that the person who's coming next to you cheated on their wife? Would you mind if the person that is saving you is also another person that is, cheats on their taxes or anything like that? No, because at the end of the day, what matters is the number of lives that we're able to save. They did not bring any criticism to a specific proposition that we brought. We said that we should have 20,000 troops, and they have three things they're supposed to do. The first thing is to create safety zones for the victims. That's the first thing. That means that we can disagree on all the other legal things that are happening, but at least let's make sure people are not dying, right? The second thing that we talked about is that we need to provide humanitarian aid and medical aid for those that are wounded. And then the third part is to basically take out the killers. They said that basically that it has casualties. And I was like, well, we said that. That's something that Loan said straight from the beginning. Yes, there will be casualties. But again, what they're trying to make you believe is that it's a war. It's not a war. It's a specific instance. It's a genocide. And in a genocide, it's the government that is killing its own people. So the enemy is not some sort of mysterious person that nobody knows. A genocide is specific. The government is killing its own people. So if we want things to happen, we need to be able to stop the ones that are doing the killings. It's not some sort of hidden agenda. It's everybody knows what's happening. The other thing that they talk about, all their arguments that they're talking about is also that there's no check for the U.S. Army and there's all these things that will happen afterwards. I think if we're able to provide to you a framework, if we're able to show you tonight, the lives are going to be saved and we're going to stop the genocide, then what happens afterwards, none of us knows. Then at least we know people are not dying. Whether the U.S. is a moral actor, nobody cares. As long as we're saving lives and as long as we're having operations that are helping us to make sure that people are not dying and people receive the medical aid that they need, and also there's humanitarian intervention. And if they gave us 100 reasons to why the U.S. is not moral, we can give you 10,000 more reasons why it's not. And that's not the debate of tonight. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so my first question is, you're saying that you want to stop genocide through the intervention of the U.S., but isn't, like, quote, I'm going to quote you saying, taking out leaders, isn't that a form of genocide?
Not really, because you're not taking out the leaders with again, genocide has very specific definition, is that it's an intent to destroy a group of people due to their race, their ethnicity, or the group that they belong to. But there you're taking out the leader not because of their race, but more because of the actions that they're doing. So it's two different things, right? It's like one of them is you're doing it because this person is of this particular race, and the other ones you're taking it because this person is killing other people.
But you also said a group of people, and isn't a leader, like, if you have multiple leaders, that's a group of people. So if you're killing a group of leaders, then you you are therefore committing genocide.
Nah, see, again, we're playing with words here. We're playing with words. And the truth of the matter is, again, it's not a genocide. It's a killing of people, and killing is also wrong. We're not condemning, but we're also saying it's different. It's not a genocide. It's you're taking out a specific target for a specific reason, because they're committing genocide against their own people.
Okay, so your speech begins with the concession that we should not trust the intentions of the United States because they have proven that domestically and abroad they advance strategic interests first and care about their stuff second. Why?
No.
Do you trust the U.S. to actually do what your plan says they should?
I'm not sure if I said we should not trust. I said that if we go in a debate there's no pure intentions, right? Meaning what I was trying to say is basically that yes, everybody has interest, and at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the interest is as long as the action is being taken. So there's no pure morality or pure things that, oh, you're doing it out of the goodness of your heart. Even people who help poor people, they don't do it because they're so good. There's so many other reasons. So as long as the U.S. is intervening, it doesn't matter what the intention, or it doesn't matter what the pure motive or whatever motive is behind that.
Well, suppose there was a scenario where this U.S. force that your plan creates intervenes to stop what they believe may become a genocide or a genocide that has already begun. But in doing so, destroy the entire infrastructure of the nation to the point that it remains in desperate poverty for multiple decades. Is that a desirable outcome?
Then we have to put two things in context. Again, when you put it like that, you make it seem like it's going to be end of the world. But again, let's put things in perspective. Poverty, people live in poverty for a long time, and in our situation, people don't live at all. I still think life is more important than anything else. So the fact that we save lives, whether or not the consequences that come after, which is all the poverty and all of that, we can deal with that as long as people are still alive. And that's what matters.
So your logic is like a life for a life kind of thing?
No, that's not my logic. My logic is lives need to be saved at all costs. People need to stay alive. And actually history shows that while the genocide was happening in Rwanda, people here in the US were like, is it really genocide or acts of genocide? How do we really define it? And I think that's a waste of time. People are dying. Let's make sure people are not dying. Let's create these safe zones. Let's give them aid. And all the other debates will happen afterwards. And again, all the things of poverty and all of that, we'll figure it out afterwards. But at least people will be alive.
By the U.S. intervening, what would that look like to you? Like, what do you expect to happen? Like, I know about the camps and having people have safe zones, but actually, like, in reality, what does that look like to you? How would they come over and just intervene in different countries? If they don't even do it in their own country, how would it look to you?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Basically, I'm saying, if the intervention of the forces do not do anything here, how would it look to you if they're going to go internationally and do that?
Well, it's two different things. Again, you're bringing things and you're just putting them together and you make it seem like it's the same thing. It's two different things. So, for example, what the government does here is, first of all, it's two different agencies. The military does not intervene in the country. The military is for protection against a foreign enemy or whatever. So it means that it's two different things, right? So the police does here does not mean that that's what's going to be done there. And then also we have a very specific way that is going to be done. That is the 3 points: creating safe spaces, providing military aid, and then on top of that, also taking out the target, which is the militia that are taking out the killings. That's how it would look like. I don't know what other ways I could use to show you how it looked like. All right, thank you.
Alrighty, is everybody good to go? Okay. Let's begin by discussing some specifics on the affirmative case. They first define what genocide is in the books. This is not the question of this debate. The question of this debate in terms of defining genocide is in how we know it's actually happening. There is a very substantial break between the policymakers in the UN and the people on the ground who are experiencing violence, and this bridge is not easily grasped by moral platitudes. The only way to know that stage 9 genocide is happening is to have reliable reporters on the ground telling you that this is taking place. This determination over whether or not something meets the definition of genocide or not, as our opponents explicitly recognized in their last speech, is exactly our point. That determination is inherently politicized and will be used to further United States strategic interests and not for furthering the lives of individuals in Rwanda. Rwanda is the exact example of how this process takes place. Political will was not existent because there was not a justification for intervening. Simply creating a force that could hypothetically respond to this violence is not sufficient to solve that. They say that there are stages to how genocide takes place. These stages are not predictable in time frame. Even though we can analyze them post-fact, these things can happen inherently extremely quickly, and intervention in the early stages of these things, for example, classification, is neither desirable nor possible when all you have is the blunt instrument of a military force to do it. We don't get to decide what other people's cultures are for them, and describing a militarized police state where we get to decide whether or not rhetoric is too genocide-y to allow, and so we need to put the troops in your country is not the type of world order that they want or that we want. Their argument about how rapid, overwhelming military force needs to be deployed is functionally the shock and awe politics of the Iraq War all over again, except on a global scale and indefinitely. What is the end point of scaring everybody from the United States military force so badly that they can never engage in political activity again? Their argument about the United Nations Charter 8 is not a justification for this type of politics. The Security Council is unaccountable to the people, and this is, and they functionally write a blank check for increased interventionism, because if you can justify it for not even genocide that's taking place now, but the prevention of genocide, something our opponents talk a big game about, then there is functionally no check on things that which can be justified in the context of preventing genocide in the future. The flip side of the three prongs of the affirmative should be mentioned here. They talk about refugee camps, but this is just a justification for long-term presence in the country. We have been in Iraq and Afghanistan for a very long time, and we show no signs of leaving. This is exactly how this would work out, because we have to maintain the safe zone for how long exactly? Particularly because when they say that they kill leaders of the militarized groups that are engaging in genocide, you don't resolve the social causes of that genocide. You started at Section 9 of the 12 steps and didn't go back and resolve any of the other things. The reason why IDebate Rwanda is so important is because the cultural communications and the grassroots aspect of these phenomena are the keys to prevention, but that's not something that your affirmative can ever access. In fact, your affirmative makes those things much worse, because by militarizing these nations and escalating those civil wars, which is exactly how United States intervention has always worked, particularly in the Middle East, these things don't solve anything. What your affirmative looks like in practice is drone strikes and aid dependency, not self-actualization or growth. You say that U.S. global presence is necessary, but global presence is not a reason for your affirmative, because your affirmative depends on receiving reports and then deploying to there. Like, all this is like you save money a little better. It's not an argument for your case. Now, the 2AC begins by conceding that the United States isn't a moral actor. As far as I understand, this argument functionally destroys the affirmative, because what they have conceded is that they use determinations of genocide as a strategic cover to advance things like oil interests. And their argument that we should only care about saving lives first is functionally moral panic, because failure to consider the long-term consequences of things like military intervention only exposes us to cyclical plan failure and means that we continue to keep intervening. These things are used to justify themselves. We destroy their economy, but now we have to intervene to prevent their economy from continuing to being bad. But the intervention is the thing that is causing the problem we're trying to solve in the first place. And they say that the government's the specific killer, so we don't really have to wonder if genocide's happening. Two problems with this. Firstly, Rwanda is a great example of how the government is not always the people who are engaging in the acts of killing. And secondly, this argument supercharges their military intervention, because what they have described now is military invasion of foreign nations that we think have engaged in genocide based on inaccurate information, and now we have decided that their whole government needs to go away. What comes next? They don't have an answer to this. Do people try to get revenge because you just murdered half their family with a drone strike? Do you create a new government? Middle East politics have disproven this historical model.
Ready?
Yes.
I'm going to be annoying with it. Can you give us specific instances where interventions have happened because of genocide, not civil war, not any other thing? Give us specific examples and where all those negative impacts that you're talking about have happened.
It doesn't matter what exactly we use to justify the intervention. What matters is the results of that intervention, which will take place in either world.
Okay, so given the fact that in the world that we live in, the opposite of your arguments, basically the non-intervention has had greater consequences than, because basically, so in your world, the only impact that we have are impacts that we've seen because of civil wars, right?
Yes, like Kosovo is an example of intervening in genocide, which has not resulted in long-term political or economic gains. In fact, we probably killed more people than were benefited from that action.
That's not true. But another thing is, who decides when genocide is happening? So was that
Yeah, who decides? Like in the status quo, Donald Trump decides if we mobilize forces to respond to genocide.
Can you talk about how the act makes it worse if we're saving lives?
Right. We have not conceded the argument that the affirmative results in more lives saved than inaction would. And actually, that's another point. The debate here is not a question of action versus inaction. It's a question of unilateral military intervention versus like prevention strategies or things like Genocide Watch that already exist.
Okay,
But the question for making it worse, yeah.
What prevention strategies are you defending? You're saying that our military intervention is going to have all these negative impacts. Okay, we'll respond to that. But
Yeah.
what are you suggesting? What should be done?
Right. We
Because
think
you're
that
not against inaction.
we
You're not-
think
you're saying your
yeah.
side is not inaction. So what is your side defending?
Right. We think that there are two quite possible status quo alternatives to your affirmative. The first is internationally based engagement, i.e., so there's unilateralism and then there's international cooperation. But since your affirmative is just U.S. forces and is dependent just on U.S. determinations of deployment, you can't access that. And secondly, your own program is a great example of how resolving the initial stages of genocide, which are a prerequisite to violence, for example, things like processes of dehumanization, which we can resolve through cross-cultural communication. Like, we think that we should have more speech, not more death, which is ultimately what your affirmative results in. And just for clarification on that point, our argument is that the way that United States forces intervene is not only through actually sending their own troops, which is something the 1NR will talk about, but by arming secessionists, for example, how we've done in the Middle East. We back and pick sides in these civil war conflicts, and that only causes escalation and more violence than would have happened. So death is bad, but making it worse is not good.
So would your side defend the international approach?
Yeah.
Police will shoot first and ask questions later. Now, the affirmation is saying that we should save lives by any means necessary, but if the U.S. can't even intervene in their own country, how do we expect them to go out internationally and save other lives? I get it, lives need to be saved, but we have to worry about all lives and not just international lives. And I say that because lives in the U.S. are being taken on the daily. Genocide against black people has been happening for over 200 years. You think about slavery, the lynchings are genocidal acts, and this isn't something that happened in the past. A genocidal act was committed less than a month ago. Day Young is his name, and he was hung in the back of his mother's yard with his pants around his ankles. Yet we want to save lives internationally when we can't even save them here. We want the military forces to react internationally in a way that are going to save lives, as I stated before, but yet we think about the way that they react to minor things like walking down the street with a bag of Skittles or going to a soda shop or even playing in a park, even breaking up a bar fight. And yes, I am talking about Tamir Rice, Emmett Till, Jamel Robinson, and Trayvon Martin. These are lives that could have been saved at the hands of our U.S. military, at the hands of police officers, yet they were not. Because as I stated before, they shoot first, they kill first, and ask questions later. Also, I would like to add, why is it that the U.S. was so slow to call Rwanda and Sudan, but was quick to say that Saddam Hussein was committing genocide acts against the Kurds prior to invasion? The unfortunate reality is that the countries recognize genocide when it is economically convenient for those in power. And in Darfur, there was and continues to be massive violence, and the perceived lack of geostrategic values of Rwanda caused the U.S. and many nations in the UN to not call violence genocides. Historically, the use of forces in the region has been determined not by their vaunted humanitarian values, but rather by the cynical oil interest of Western powers. And what does it look like when military forces get involved? 9 times out of 10, it's chaotic because, as I stated before, it's a power thing. It's not ever organized or safe when big military forces get involved. Not tens or hundreds, but millions of bombs aimed at any targets the military commanded decides are strategic. The goal is the absolute shutdown of critical infrastructure, and the body count has increased inevitably. The United States is the biggest predator of genocidal acts. From its very can you help me with this word, please? Help me with this.
Inception.
Sorry, I'm doing so bad right now. From its very inception, the operations of the United States have depended on systems of oppression, racial classifications, and the modern world. This has extended.
Okay, so first I would like to point out a few things. We have asked them examples of where the U.S. has intervened in a genocide and it has led to worse. There was no example given, but there was an example for us where the U.S. didn't intervene and things got worse. Rwanda, Darfur, more than 1 million people lives dead. So at the end of the day, we are showing you that life could be saved, and they're showing us nothing. So that's ridiculous. And then, and also, they asked about how do we know the genocide is happening. I said in my first speech, there are about 800 bases around the world, which is why we're saying the U.S. is a great actor, because it has all those people around the world. Then they will know there is a genocide or not. According to the definition we gave, when the government is trying to eradicate part or a whole race of people according to their ethnicity, race. And again, they say that what stage are we going to stop the genocide? Again, the genocide is going to be stopped at the 9th stage by military intervention. How are we going to know that? Again, the 800 bases. They say that Rwanda is an example that the government didn't cause the genocide, but that's not true. Rwanda is actually a good example where the government is the one that planned the whole genocide. There's other example in Germany, it was the government. All these genocides, it was the government. And we're showing you how our 20,000 troops will come and stop the leaders of the genocide and the people that are causing the genocide for lives to be saved. Again, they never gave us an example where the genocide wasn't caused by the government, because we're showing you where it was caused by the government and where, when the U.S. is intervening, things would get better. And then at the end of the day, they're saying that how are they going to save other people when they can't save their own people? The U.S. saves over 4 billion African children every single year in Africa. So if you can save those 4 billion children only in humanitarian aid, imagine how many people could be saved using military intervention, which is what we're fighting for, saving lives. And then they're saying that at the end of the day that the U.S. is not a moral actor, which is why it shouldn't intervene. But there is no moral actor in this world. If we were going by whether there is a moral actor, there is no moral actor, then there will never be an intervention. So should we let our people die because there is no moral actor? I don't think so. That we should make our people leave, we should save lives, whether there is a moral actor or not, because at the end of the day, there's never going to be a moral actor. Thank you.
Hyping me, man. All right. Woo! Okay. The affirmative proposal is one of many ideas in this world that looks good on paper and is a bloodbath in practice. They say that we don't have examples in this debate. This is not true. U.S. interventionism is not the exception, it's the rule, and we have a lot of evidence that we can point to as examples of why this particular practice does not result in good outcomes. We can begin with Libya, now currently being torn apart by ISIS because of a power vacuum. We can look at South Sudan, split in half and lacking an economic and political future. We can look at Kosovo, and sure, they aren't having a genocide right now, but to stop it, we had to turn their nation into a war zone and destroy their chances of developing economically or politically for decades. This is the false choice of the affirmative. Why must we accept perpetual poverty and destruction as the result of anti-genocidal actions? What is the justification for this choice? And Iraq is a great example specifically because our fear of genocide against the Kurds was the justification for a lot of U.S. presence in that nation, and particularly our intervention. Where is the analysis of that argument? Vietnam, because the communists of the North are going to genocide the South. We must engage in warfare to prevent that encroachment. This is exactly how this works. And finally, police shootings are a great example of this. Officers shoot first and ask later, and this model is exactly how U.S. forces in the region are going to engage. We do not know the language, the politics, the culture. We go in as if we know everything when we do not. Our hubris is our worst enemy in this case, and troop education is not automatic. We need translators and complex on-the-ground relationships, and the lack of these things becomes an on-the-ground liability, particularly because the affirmative requires immediate hammer-like response when there is no previous U.S. involvement in that nation. And the issue with this conversation about whether or not stopping genocide is worth more lives is a category mistake, because it's a question of how we measure the impact of policies. We can see large body counts for successful genocides, but what about the people dying in refugee camps of starvation and disease? What about people dying in the slums of Vietnam? These things are not measured by the affirmative because their life-first framing is a moral panic. We can't ever question the long-term impact of U.S. intervention if all we can think about is the immediacy of the lives that we must resolve right now. And they say that Rwanda proves that the government was behind all types of killings, but our argument has been that the affirmative can never resolve the root causes of genocide. Your affirmative was very good at outlining how the 9th stage is when we become involved, but those previous 8 stages cannot ever be resolved by military intervention. These things can only be resolved by cross-cultural communication, which is actively hurt by the affirmative because the affirmative requires intervening in these processes, but the mechanism of U.S. intervention has always been picking sides in civil wars, which only causes escalation of these conflicts because we back and arm rebels. This has always been how U.S. intervention works, and there is no particular reason why the affirmative would resolve this. Recall that the flip side of all of the advocacies of the affirmative is very bad. The safety zones that they advocate for is a justification for perpetual presence, which is bad on face because it means that we basically control their nation as a puppet state perpetually, or we back out and never fill the political vacuum, something that the affirmative has no mechanism to resolve. If you wipe out a nation's government through the what your plan mandates to stop ongoing violence, what is the future of that country? They don't particularly have one. All you've left is a body of extremely angry people who have no political organization, which is why they are going to seek revenge. The lack of political coordination in these nations is a reason why violence after the intervention would be worse than it was before. Now, let's just back up a little bit. The United States does not have moral or legal authority to unilaterally determine who gets to die in extrajudicial drone strikes, which is what the affirmative leads to. That's not something that we should buy into.
So let's start. First thing is, I think that one of the frustration of this debate is I think we're having 10,000 debates in just one debate. I think the question here, it's very important that we are very particular in the words that we use. We gave a very specific definition of what a genocide is. They gave you what the negative is very good at, is basically taking a lot of these cases and telling you this is what happened in South Sudan, this is what happened in Libya, and they did not give you a lot of the context of what some of those interventions were. First of all, I'll give you a few things. They said that the U.S. was slow in that the U.S. did not actually say that there was a genocide in Darfur. That is a lie. President Bush was the first one to actually say that there
was a genocide, and actually the UN actually has a force in Sudan to actually stop the genocide. So they have stopped all the killings that have been happening. So the second thing that they talked about is that they talked about Libya, that the reason to why Libya is a great example of what happens basically as an illustration of our affirmative case. Again, they are good at citing examples by giving you the context. What happened in Libya is we removed Muammar Gaddafi, and that was actually, it was not because he was committing a genocide against his people, it's because he was crushing his opponents. And those are two different things. So let's not just take things and put them all together and claim that they're one thing. They're totally different. There are specific genocides that have been claimed, right? Now the first thing, and a few things that they'll have to say, they kept on saying this thing of who gets to decide what a genocide is. And they're very good at not listening to our answers. Some of the answers that we gave is that the UN Office for Genocide Prevention actually decides that. The Genocide Watch actually has, if you want to learn, you go on their website, they actually have alerts that shows you all the different countries that are at different stages that they are in. And they talk that the US is at a genocide is happening in the US. Well, I would like to say that actually the Genocide Watch says that the US is at stage number 6. So it does not mean that what is happening, it's not like a systematic that we're destroying everybody. Yes, there is a lot of these issues, but it's not to the point where things are wrong. They said that we cannot solve these issues because we cannot resolve the root causes of all these things. Let me tell you, in the world that we live in, if you're waiting to solve the root cause of everything, you will never act. Part of this is the world that we want to show you. In their world, they gave you all the negative impact of US intervention. But here's the thing that they never told you. There's no one example that they can provide you of the US intervening for a specific case of genocide. They claimed that Kosovo was one, but they like to say that things got worse. That is a lie. It didn't get worse. Killings were stopped. And actually, a lot of the debate is always like, why did the US intervene in Kosovo and things happened, right? Now, but here's what they say. A lot of the arguments that they're making, we can show you on our side the non-intervention has led to more people dying. It has created worse things. They are not able to show you how a specific proposal can lead to all these harms. They just use generic US intervention bad arguments, which are good. We should have a debate next year when we come about US intervention, but that is not the debate of today. So part of the other things that we also have to know is that they claim that this is what you get on our side. On our side, we give you a very specific proposal. We say that we have a refugee, we have a safe zone for refugees. The second thing that we talk about is that we have humanitarian aid and medical aid for the people that are dying. And then the third is killing out the leaders. Here's what they did. They did really well at outlining the third point, but I like to say, even if we give them that maybe striking out the leaders might not be the best. Even if they win on that it creates more harm. We still win on the fact that those two are still very important. There's no intervention that they can tell us that has been done by the US that actually has this three-folded mission. But we are saying that if we have this three-folded mission, one that saves lives, one that provides safety for the refugees, and that provides humanitarian aid, then we can be able to do things that they can't do on their side. All the arguments are, even though they said that they're going to defend an international intervention, they never defended it. All they're saying is inaction, and the US should not intervene. Let me tell you, if we wait for a moral actor to intervene, that will not happen. Now, whether the US has all the police brutality and all these things, again, that's a good topic for next year's debate. IDebate Rwanda versus Weber. The US federal government should stop killing black people. That's the debate for next year, not this year. Thank you.